Hey, this is Jim Francis. I want to talk a little bit, about building your confidence and give you some exact strategies that you can use to do that, whether it's, about business or whether it's about speaking or presenting. And certainly I use this for speaking and presenting, because one of the things I was terrified of public speaking, learned some skill sets that made a big difference with respect to that. So let me kind of walk you through some great strategies that can make a major difference. Number one is that competency, right, builds confidence. And what I specifically mean about that is there are certain tactic strategies or what we call frames that make a major difference in terms of your ability to speak and present. Many people, get terrified when it comes to speaking. And when that happens, first of all, the adrenaline starts to kick off, the cortisol starts to kick off, creates a physical response in people. And typically that's because they're having thoughts about, geez, I'm not very good at this. They have thoughts like, man, I always mess up my open. I always mess up. I get nervous. And when you say things to yourself like I get nervous and I don't know what I'm talking about or I forget things, I mean, first of all, that self-talk kind of affects you, no question. But one of the things you can do is to build strategies or what we call frames. Now, there are 7 ways to open a presentation, right? So if you know the 7 ways to open a presentation, generally you don't get stuck for how you're going to open. One of the ways, is the 2 question, the mind read, and the future pace open, which basically does you ask 2 questions to which the answer is going to be yes. And it could be, if I was talking about speaking or presenting, could be something like, geez, you really want to become good at speaking and presenting and delivering a great presentation, don't you? So that's a yes. I focus their attention. And then I would say something, and you want to make sure it's easy, something that you can do. I ask a second question to which the answer is yes. And then I'll do a mind read, which is where they're at. Perhaps right now, when you speak or present, your hands sweat, your mouth cotton balls, and you have difficulty getting the words out, which is a mind read of where they're at. Right now, we'll use a little bit of transition language, which will say, can you imagine getting really good at this so that anytime in the future you can actually present, anytime in the future you can do a TED talk, anytime in the future you can step up and instantly deliver. And I want you to imagine that I'm going to do this agreement frame. If you are over here and you want to get over here, wouldn't you agree that you need a system or a process to get better? So what I basically used is a 5 step, open, right? And if I use that 5 step open, I can do that for any product, any service, anytime I want. So learning frames, and there's 6 other ways to open a presentation, by the way, but learning frames really allows you because you have a competency skill in the frame, the skills, the steps. You don't really worry about what's going to come out of your mouth. You don't have to memorize and things of that nature. So number one is any type of skill, right? Anytime you have a lack of confidence, you want to develop a skill set, a frame with respect to that. The second major thing that you should consider and do in terms of, whether it's presenting or whether it's just skill in general, is to be careful about your self-talk. When I talk about self-talk, I know when I was first beginning speaking and presenting that I was terrified, and I used to say to myself things like, I'm not very good at this, I always mess up, I get nervous. And when you say things like that, that's who you become. Now, I spent a fair amount of time with a guy named Tony Robbins. He's an incredible speaker and presenter. And one of the things I got an opportunity to do was to see Tony before he presents on stage to 20,000 people, right? And one of the things I noticed about him is when he was backstage, he has this little rebounder. And when he gets on the rebounder, he starts jumping up and down. Now, I'm going to talk about physiology a little bit later on, but literally what he's doing is either increasing, the energy, the passion, the excitement by changing his physiology, or he's burning off the nerves by doing the bouncing up and down. So I'll talk about that in a little bit. But one of the things I noticed is when he was on this rebounder for minutes, he started yelling and screaming, passion, excitement, outcomes. Right. And when he got off the rebounder, right, went over to meet one of the administrative staff, I stood beside him and said, hey, Tony, what was that all about? And he said, I was controlling my self-talk, right? Rather than thinking about all the negatives, he was thinking about all the things he wanted to deliver. In that moment, I created an acronym for myself, and that acronym was EPIC. Right? Now, epic is an acronym. It's not just a word. Yes, I want to be epic on stage. Yes, I want to deliver a great presentation. But at the same moment, EPIC stands for energy, passion, influence, and closing. Now, the C used to say communication, but I changed it to closing because you want to impact people to take action, right? Now, I haven't been nervous for a long time to get onto stage, whether it's 30 people or 300 people or 3,000 people. But I remember a time where I had to deliver in front of 17,000 people on an arena, definitely a decade ago, and I started getting a little bit nervous again. Right. So all I did was to control my self-talk and not think about all the negative things, the duck talk. I wanted to have eagle talk. And I started to say to myself, epic energy, passion, influence, and closing. Energy, passion, influence, and closing. Energy, passion. And when I'm saying energy, passion, influence, and closing, I'm not saying I'm going to forget my first sentence. So controlling self-talk, before a presentation can be an incredible way for you to make sure that you deliver. And I really do believe, as Ken Blanchard taught me decades ago, out there in the marketplace, there are ducks and eagles. Ducks have language that distorts, deletes, it causes problems, gives them beliefs in themselves and capabilities, and reinforces negative stuff, right? If you say to yourself, I can't, you can't, I can, right? Because I don't say to myself, I can't. I will say, how can I? Right? So if I have an issue or a problem, I will say, how can I? I don't say to myself, I should. I don't say to myself, I'll do it later. I don't say to myself, I'll think it over. I have eagle talk, and I know that that eagle talk burns into my heart and my soul and causes me to be successful. Right? So you want to skip the language, the patterns, the words like, geez, I always mess up. I can't do this. Man, if you say the word I should, right, you're shitting all over your dreams, right? You need to say I am, I will, I shall, right? And the I ams in your life, the eagle talk will drive you to success and help you build confidence. So we want to make sure that we have those positive affirmations, not those negative affirmations, and make sure that we're focusing on, even if you catch yourself, saying something that's negative, you need to cross that out and do something positive with respect to it. One of the things you can do, and this is one of the things I kind of learned from Tony, is when he's doing the rebounder, one of the other things you have to realize is when you start to get nervous, there's a physical response. The adrenaline starts to kick off, your heart speeds up, you speeds up the heart rate, the blood pressure goes up. That's all physical response to the cortisol and or the adrenaline that's burning off. So one of the things you can do is if you know that's something that happens for you is manage your state. Right? When I say manage your state, literally 15 minutes before you're due to present, go do some exercise. Right? I literally, in the past, would if I had a hotel event, I would go climb the stairs and burn off some of the adrenaline, burn off some of the cortisol. Because typically what happens in terms of the brainwave patterns, right? You're in beta, you're in gamma, right? Your heart starts to pound, the cortisol's churning, and that creates more breathing issues and heart rate and pressure. And if you go burn it off early, right, then what will happen is you relax. And I clearly remember this being nervous in the first 3 minutes when I was speaking and presenting, and then relaxing and being able to deliver with no problem. Well, if that's the case, go burn it off 10, 15 minutes. Go do something regular that burns, whether it's climbing the stairs and coming back down, or jumping up on a rebounder and bouncing. We use that to stimulate the adrenaline and the cortisol, burn it off early, right? And then you get more into an alpha state where you can deliver and you have no problem delivering. Right. One of the other tactics or strategies, and I certainly learned this, from Mark Divine in his book Unbeatable Mind, was to use a fair amount of box breathing. Now, box breathing is a simple tactic. It is literally you count in through your nose for a count of 4. You hold it for a count of 4. You blow it out through your mouth, count of 4, and then you hold it for a count of 4. Now, if you do that for 12 minutes, right, and doing the in, out, hold, whatever it might be, then literally what will happen is you'll go from gamma state, beta state, to more of an alpha state, and beta state and gamma state tend to be linked to cortisol, adrenaline, and your mind going crazy, where alpha state is a more relaxed state. So you can do this for 12 minutes. And if you do it for 12 minutes, you'll be more of in a flow state. And if you're in a flow state, then you tend to deliver a better presentation a little bit slower and not too fast with respect to it. So box breathing might be a great way. Certainly visualization works. Anytime you can do any kind of a box breathing, for example, to get into a meditative state or even a meditative state or even a guided meditation state, and then visualize seeing yourself deliver a great presentation or a great product or service or whatever it might be for you that you want to accomplish, that can be a great thing. Now, this goes all the way back to the 1960s, when the Germans did visualization, and when you do visualization, you have to put yourself into the position. Now, what was interesting about, visualization, and I kind of learned this a little bit from Ken Blanchard as well, I went golfing with Ken. And when I went golfing with Ken is an amazing presenter when it comes to leadership and management and things and he taught me about ducks and eagles as well. But Ken also is a great golfer. Right. So when I was golfing with Ken, I said to him, Ken, I have a bit of a problem when I'm golfing. I three putt all the time. Right? It affects my game. I'm not getting lower scores because I three putt all the time. Now notice I said I three putt all the time, which I probably should have done my self-talk because that's definitely duck talk. But visualization, he said, Jim, tell me what you think about, what you see in your mind, when you're putting. And he said, well, I said I relax, I do a relaxation ritual to relax, right? And then I see myself hitting the ball and getting within 6 inches of the cup, the hole. And he said, that's the problem. You're visualizing, and what you're not doing is putting yourself into the position where you've already done it. Right. And I went, I don't get what you mean there, Ken. He said, well, what you need to picture of, what you need to see in your head is you've already done the event. You've already done whatever the system process, whatever it might be. And I said, well, give me an example. He says, well, you don't see yourself hitting the ball. You don't see yourself, getting within 6 inches of the hole because that's the wrong visualization. What you see is you see yourself going to the hole, reaching into the hole, pulling up the golf ball, throwing it up in the air and saying, wow, that was a great putt. And then hearing other people say how great that putt is, and then walk off the green and feel how great it was to make that exceptional 12-foot putt. Which kind of resonated with me immediately because that's visual, auditory, kinesthetic. I see myself doing it, have done it already. I hear myself talking. I hear other people talking about me. And then I have the feelings of what a great putt is, which is VAC, visual, auditory, kinesthetic, which is great visualization. And the other part to that was I remembered back to the Olympics and the Germans doing visualization, and then it became, turned on. Everybody was doing visualization. Well, the Germans didn't see themselves winning a race. The Germans saw themselves on the podium getting the gold medal, which is, I've already done it. And then seeing themselves, hearing themselves, feeling themselves on the pedestal already winning, right? So one of the things you can do is to visualize, make sure it's VAC visual, and you've already done it as opposed to I see myself doing it, right? So visualization can be a great way, for you to see yourself accomplishing any tasks. Tony taught me the swish pattern. That's an NLP based kind of piece. I did spend time with Richard Bandler and got certified as an NLP trainer. The swish pattern basically means that you have a memory, right? Or you see yourself doing something and it's not positive, right? And literally that memory tends to be very colorful. It tends to be in front of you. It tends to have words and pieces with respect to it. And when I do this, I think about, how I got terrified of public speaking. And that was, my parents immigrated to Canada. I was in Canada doing grade 1. And then my mom and my dad had a bit of an issue. My mom took us back to England. I missed half of grade 1. Then I came back to Canada because they corrected their relationship, and I had to go into grade 2 and I had a grade 1 education, right? Meaning I was reading from a grade 1 reader, but my math was pretty good. So they put me in grade 2. And when I read from the reader, literally, I could not read the words because I had a grade 1 reading education. And literally, I would stutter and stammer trying to get the words out because I didn't know how to say them, right? And the kids around me all laughed, right? So my picture in my head was bigger kids, laughing at me, full color, right? And me being embarrassed about speaking and presenting. And I know that was a memory that literally built chains on it over time. because you have that memory, then you have another bad memory, and all of a sudden you're terrible, right? So that was the image that was in my head that began my issue with public speaking. So one of the things that Tony did was take whatever that image is. It's, it's color, it's a very vibrant. You have the kids laughing at me, right? And then think about the picture of where you want to be. Where I wanted to be is I wanted to be an adult. I wanted to be on stage, right? And start to change it by taking the terrible picture, making it small, right? And then taking the unknown, the future pace, the switch pattern of something that's good. And literally, what he would say is, you have the picture of you being bad, you distort it, start to make it black and white, start to make it small, right? And then start to bring out this great picture of who you are and what you're about, right? And literally, it's called a swish pattern because you start with the negative and then you replace it with something that's great, right? And if you do that swish pattern, and you make the bad image, the bad thing that you have, bad behavior, you make it small, you make it gray, you make it static, you don't make it a picture, you make it a small picture, not a video, and you bring yourself in doing a great job. If you practice that, which is replacing the bad with the good, essentially, in terms of the picture, right? Making one static, one very vibrant, and the one that's vibrant is the one that you want to deliver in terms of a presentation. That switch pattern over time will kill the negative and improve you to the positive, because what you're doing is you're rewriting the movie. You're rewriting the negative that's holding you back. So switch patterns are a great way. That's an NLP technique. You might look online and find out a little bit more. One of the great models that you can do is to use a five-step process to eliminate, the negative beliefs or the lack of confidence, for example. So one of the things you can do is sit down with yourself and say, okay, I believe I have a lack of confidence because it is a belief system, which stands for BS, belief system, or it also stands for the bull thing, right? We need to kill that. And one of the ways you can kill that is to say, okay, if I hold on to this belief system for the rest of my life, for the next year or whatever it might be, what's the cost of that? When I say cost of that, two elements, logic and emotion. So what's the cost of that financially? If I believe I'm a bad speaker, right, or a poor speaker, or not the greatest speaker, that might affect me, in terms of my financial outlook, right? That could affect my ability to have a nice job and lifestyle, right? And if I hold on to that belief system for a lifetime, that actually might not be the best thing around. So we look at the cost of keeping that belief system, which is logic, right? It cost me financially. It cost me in terms of my family and giving more to my family. It cost me in terms of my business. It cost me in terms of whatever it might be. That's the logical piece. But then we also have to think about, the emotional piece. Man, if I have a lack of confidence and I keep that and I believe that, what's going to happen? Well, I'm probably going to not reach my full potential. I'm probably not going to touch the lives of other people that I could be talking to because I have a lack of confidence. So we literally look at the pain of keeping that belief system, because it is a belief system. And then we look at the gain of if we change that belief system, turn it to I am epic. I am amazing. And if I change that belief system, will that empower me? Will it empower me personally? But if it empowers me, it also will empower other people in my family, because I'll pass that on to my kids, right, to my loved ones. It will help me in terms of empowering me to help and change the lives of other people and improve their lives. So the pain gain model, it's kind of like Christmas and we're Scrooge, right? If Scrooge doesn't change the behavior, his life's going to suck, right? But if he changes the behavior, his life becomes this great thing that he can share with other people and be financially well off, right? And you have a choice there. So you want to make the choice to work on the pain, both logically and emotionally, and then work on the gain positively. Now, one of the things I would add to that is if you do the gain part of the equation in terms of changing the belief system, reward yourself when you make the shift, right? So if I go from a lack of confidence to more confidence, right? And I do well, maybe I do well in speaking, maybe I do well in business, maybe I do well in life. Reward yourself. Reward yourself with a toy. Reward yourself with a gift. Whether that's taking your family out on an amazing vacation, buying a Rolex watch, whatever it might be. But the reward will actually reinforce the confidence with respect to your life and pattern. The other part is you can always interrupt the pattern, right? Interrupt the pattern basically means, when I notice myself, starting to doubt myself, when I notice myself starting to have a lack of confidence, I physically will go change my physiology, right? By going for a run, going for a walk, changing, breathing, box breathing, visualization, so that that thought, that thing that's driving me crazy about my confidence disappears and I don't have it, right? So pattern interrupts are a really good thing to do. I remember, my middle son, Matt, I found him crying in the bedroom one time, right? And I said, "What's going on, Matt? Why are you in the bedroom crying?" And he said, "Just lost my girlfriend," right? So he's emotionally distraught. And while he's emotionally distraught, he's not listening to positive thoughts, by the way, because, I mean, if you're 15 years old, the likelihood is you're going to find another girlfriend sometime in your future. He's not going to hear that message if I tell him. So I actually got him to go ice skating with me because we both play ice hockey. And we played ice hockey for a little bit, got him out of the negative because change your physiology, change your thoughts, right? So literally when I changed that physiology for him, after we had some fun and we were enjoying it, he's smiling and laughing. He's no longer physiology, he's depressed. He's got positive physiology. Then I talk about, hey, look at, I remember a time when I was dating a girl named Cheryl and we broke up and I felt like you doubt. And guess what? Next year, I met this great other girl, and it was actually more passion, more excitement, more fun than with Cheryl, right? Because there will be a chance for you to have another girlfriend. He's more apt to listen to me in positive physiology than he is in negative physiology. And you're more apt if you break the pattern by doing box breathing, break the pattern by exercise, break the pattern by changing your physiology, which generally leads to a change in terms of your thoughts as well. So break the pattern. Also learned this from a guy named Charles Gibbons. Now, Gibbons was one of my great mentors on the financial side, best-selling author. He knew 400 financial strategies. I spent a lot of time with him. I actually was a partner in his business for well over 6 years. And one of the things he did was a program called Super Self, Super Mind, and really how to double your results in a very short period of time. And one of the things is he would say most people are programmed negatively. They're programmed to look, for why they're not confident. They're programmed to look for the problem. They're programmed to look for an issue that might pop up, right? And that, if you put garbage into a computer, you get garbage out. So what he would say is when you have a thought, that will turn into a physiology. That physiology will turn into more negative thoughts and you'll spiral down. And what you need to do is the moment you have a negative thought, you need to stop, get a piece of paper, write down the negative thought, cross it out kinesthetically, feeling wise, and come up with 2 to 3 positive reasons why that thought would be good, right? And this is called positive replacement. And what it does is condition you not to look for the negatives in life, but to look for the positives in life. And if you're always looking for a 2-to-1 relationship or a 3-to-1 relationship on, why that thought is not a good thought and the 3 thoughts that are good thoughts, guess what? You'll begin to program the computer to always look for the positive in life as opposed to the negative. Now, I talk about the 4 personalities, and I always talk about spades, diamonds, hearts, and clubs, right? And the club is always looking for the negative, why it won't work, right? One of the biggest things they need to do is to interrupt that pattern, develop new positive replacement patterns to look for the positives in life, positives in business, positives in speaking and presenting, right? I am great. I am fantastic, right? As opposed to, I suck, right? So that's another way. One of the greatest ways is literally to create something called an anchor. An anchor is an NLP kind of tactic, but we kind of know this indirectly, right? There's a physiology to depression. People are depressed, their whole shoulders are down, their breathing is shallow, head is down, eyes are down. And when your eyes are down, literally, NLP suggests, and I believe this to be true, that you have either a digital conversation with yourself or deep emotional feelings. And that digital conversation, we talk to ourselves. That digital conversation typically is not positive, right? If we look down, right, we also tend to have an emotional piece, and that emotion is not positive. So, literally, if you notice that people are looking down, they're probably talking to themselves, having a negative. Now, if that means if we're doing that, right, we're having a conversation with ourselves, which is not positive, and emotions that are not positive. So, one of the things you can do is to control your physiology, to have better thoughts, right, and move in the right direction, right? So anchoring, is a good way of doing that, and I'll talk about that in just a minute. But there are also people that are very positive, that are motivated, that are excited, that are passionate, and their shoulders tend to be up, their breathing tends to be from the chest, chin's up, eyes up, and they're looking up. Now, NLP suggests when you're looking up, you're more visual. When you're looking sideways, you're more auditory. And when you're looking down, you're more kinesthetic, which is very true, by the way. I've noticed this behavior because I've been, an NLP practitioner for years. And I also spent time with Richard Bandler, who trained me as an NLP trainer, right? So literally, I've seen this happen. And you can change state by changing your physiology, right? Interrupted. I just did that with my son Matthew in terms, being upset, now being excited about life. But you can change people's physical state. And when you change that by changing the way that they look, if they're looking down or looking up, or their physiology, you actually change the thoughts that are literally in their head, right? And I've noticed, right, in terms of the personalities, the spade personality that wants to get the result in a very short period of time, the diamond personality, who wants to have fun and excitement. Both of those personalities are fast paced. Both of those personalities like things to be speeded up, not slowed down, right? And I've noticed that those personalities tend to be more visual and tend to be more auditory, right? So if I'm that individual, and literally I'm 70%, spade and I'm 30% diamond, then I know I need to be visual, have to look up to motivate myself. I know I need to be forward thinking, excited, and motivated, right? I also know that hearts and diamonds tend to be a little slower paced. Because they're a little slower paced and they tend to look it down, they tend to be more kinesthetic and more auditory, right? So one of the things I've learned as a speaker is to be able to change my pace to meet the needs of all those people, but also I know that I personally can do that for myself and speed myself up, have visual as opposed to looking down and being negative. So I interrupt the pattern by being more visual, with respect to it. And then there's anchoring. And what I mean about anchoring is, right, there is a time in your life where there was a song playing, and when that song played, you had deep negative emotions, right? Maybe you broke up with somebody, maybe when your mom passed or mom passed, literally that song was playing. I know this when the funeral was happening for my mom, there was a certain song that played. Every time that song played, I start getting emotional and it's not positive, right? So what happened was you were emotional, a song played, a message played, something happened, and now that's a trigger, that causes negative emotion in you. Well, first of all, you can interrupt that, you can do positive replacement, you can do all those kinds of things, right? But if that's the case, right, there's also the case of when you're excited, when you're motivated, some song plays. And I would say, okay, there's a song out there for you. And when that song plays, you get happy feet, right? You want to dance, you want to enjoy, you're more visual, you're having fun, right? Well, that's a trigger. The trigger for positive emotions, the trigger for negative emotions. And you know what? You can create that, right? So one of the songs I love, is by the Black Eyed Peas, Let's Get Started, right? So I literally, anytime that I'm going on stage, right, whether it's a small stage or a big stage, that song must play, right? And the reason that song must play is it gets me into a happy mood. I'm excited, I'm motivated. And even if I'm sad, even if I have issues, even if I don't believe in myself, even if I have a lack of confidence, when that song plays, I'm ready to deliver. And that is a positive anchor or a trigger to always deliver. Now, last year, unfortunately, my brother passed. I love my brother. He's an incredible individual. We had a lot of fun together, so I'm sad, right? Literally a Thursday night, he passes, and the next morning I got to go speak, in front of 35 people. I'm not positive. I'm kind of negative. I'm kind of down, right? And I'm thinking about my brother and thinking about the funeral and thinking about his kids and all of that kind of stuff. Yet next morning I got to deliver nine o'clock, got to deliver. That song plays, I'm in state. I'm ready to deliver, right? Deliver 2.5 hours, right? Then I can go back to doing, the lamenting and the other part. But create an anchor, whether it's a word like epic. One of the other words for me is boom, right? Did a lot of fire walks with Tony Robbins, and then I did my own fire walks up in Toronto, Canada. Took 3,000 people across operating goals. I wanted to get them into a positive physical state, mental state, and I would say, well, let's create a physical piece, and we say the word boom, right? So boom creates high energy in me, right? The song by Black Eyed Peas, Let's Get It Started, fires off that emotion and I'm in high energy. So you can create an anchor for yourself, whether it's a sound, a movement, or whatever it might be, and that will actually get you turned on. The last one in terms of confidence, whether it's speaking, presenting, or life, or business, whatever it might be, is you can change your physiology. And when you change your physiology, tone, timbre, movement, visual words versus feeling words, because 45% of the audience is visual, 40% of the audience is auditory, 20% is kinesthetic. That includes ourselves. I'm more visual, more auditory, not as kinesthetic. That's me. Other people can be more kinesthetic or more auditory. So I can change my tone, my timbre, my quality to meet the needs of those people, but also for myself. I want to get more motivated. I need to speed up and energize, right? I can also change my physiology in terms of an anchoring technique or things of that nature. Eventually, as a speaker, one of the things that you can establish is stage anchors. And when I say stage anchors, if I'm on stage delivering in front of an audience, I know the center position for me is my conversational voice. It's my power position. I know that if I go over to the right hand side, and I learned this from Tony Robbins initially, and then Bandler Grinder, those guys eventually, when I go over to the right hand side, I slow down. My voice normally drops a little bit, right? And this is literally for me to deliver to the clubs and the hearts who are a little bit slower paced, that aren't as visual as some of the other people. And when I do that, I actually can change myself in terms of the space, right? So over on the right hand side for me, left hand side of the audience, if you're in the audience looking, that's going to be a little slower pace. That's going to be more emotional. That's going to be kinesthetic. That's going to be auditory. I know in the center, I'm going to be more conversational. I'm going to be more auditory, right? And then when I get over to the left-hand side, I'm going to speed up in terms of energy and passion and my words, and I'm going to talk more visually, more auditorily, what you said to yourself, what people are saying about you, what you can see, what you can imagine. And that piece creates anchors in me, right, to be a little more emotional or a little more exciting, a little more passion, or a little more about, connecting with people. So I hope you enjoyed that piece. Certainly when it comes to confidence, the first stage is always to have competence. And then it's self-talk, it's visualization, it's managing your body, your tone, your timbre, your quality, anchoring techniques to get the most out of yourselves. This is Jim Francis saying so long for now.